Evening, everyone, and welcome to our third event of this year's Storytale Festival. We have two fabulous middle grade authors, Emma and Sophie Kirtley, who between them have written this gorgeous bundle of books. There we go. Did it round the wrong way, didn't we? I'm Kate Frost, and along with the wonderful Ellie Freeman, I co-founded the festival in 2019. I'm also an author, and although I mainly write romantic escape novels for adults, I also have a middle grade time travel adventure trilogy published. Before we start talking about writing for children, I just want to thank Literature Works, who have supported the festival this year. In conjunction with this event, they offered 4 free advice surgeries, which I've just checked this evening, and the last one has now been fully booked. So hopefully anybody who goes on them will find them really useful. At the end of this event, I will put in the website for Literature Works. They're Southwest based, and they've got loads of resources for writers, writing community events and courses. So they're a really useful resource if anybody wants to check them out. And also Emma and Sophie would love to have questions from you. So if there's anything that you would like to ask, please pop it in the comments. I'll be keeping an eye on it and try and filter them in as we go along, or we'll leave time at the end to answer any questions. And otherwise, even if you haven't got a question, just say hello and let us know that you're watching. So Emma and Sophie, we're completely thrilled to have you both here talking about writing for children this evening, a subject I know you're both passionate about. So to kick things off, can you tell us first a little bit about yourself and your writing, and also why in particular you write for this age group? Emma, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, okay. So hello, hi everybody, and I'm so glad to be here again. Storytale Fest lives on. Kate and Ellie
just
yeah, that's it. We just keep it alive, and hopefully eventually we'll get to see people in the flesh for real again. We will get there. Yeah, so a little bit about me. Kate's already shown you my 2 books, which will pop in there. Milton the Mighty was my first book, published in 2019, and it tells the story of a superhero spider. So for anybody who is a little bit scared of spiders, or anybody who loves spiders, it's a perfect book for you. Milton is very small, but does amazing things. So in book 1, he starts an internet campaign with his house human, who's called Zoe, to save his species, save spiders in general. And then book 2, they go off on a well-deserved holiday after all the celebrity following on from Milton the Mighty, only to find out that a ruthless, devious businessman is bulldozing in a fantastic environment on the volcano, and we've got endangered species, spider species, lives at risk. So they leap in to save the day, as spiders do, because we love them. They're amazing. So that's my books. I've been writing for probably about 5 years now, writing for children, that is. I have tried writing for adults and I'm not very good at it. I just love writing for kids. It's where my passion is. I love meeting people in schools, doing school visits, getting to chat to kids. And for me, children are the most passionate readers. They love great stories. They love great characters. And I think if you write for children, you write for people who are going to be readers for life. So it's quite a big responsibility as well, which I also really love.
Yeah, that's a lovely way to think about it. That's great. So how about you, Sophie?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. And just to second what Emma said, it's just wonderful that Storytale is there and what you do. So it's great. really great to be here. And I absolutely second all the things that Emma was saying as well about writing for children and the magic of that and the power of that as well. Sorry, my accent, the power of that. The what? The power. But yeah, the power of writing for children. And I think because you're writing for people who are at important moments in their lives, times of change, times of discovery, and it feels like a real privilege to me to write for children. And I know that how I came to it, I probably deluded myself into thinking that I was an adult writer for years and years and years. And, you know, when I was young, I wrote very serious things, like very serious poems with broken hearts and deep things, very deep. But I was just kidding myself, really. And I didn't know until I was quite terribly old that actually I should be writing for children. And I taught for a long time. I taught in secondary schools and I have my own children. And I suddenly realized that I was surrounded by children. My whole world was and had been and potentially would be for a very long time all about children. And when I looked at what I was writing through a different sort of angle, I thought, hang on a minute, this isn't for grown-ups at all. Like, peel back all the phony, serious stuff, and actually underneath it is just an adventure. And what I really wanted to write was adventures. And I think there's a real limitlessness to writing for children that I absolutely love. I feel like I could just get away with anything. And in terms of where my imagination might take me and where my imagination might take readers. And that's what I really, really love about it. So my books are my little duo. It's hard to find them in the right spot. That's first. The Wild Way Home and The Way to Impossible Island. And The Wild Way Home was published in July 2020, so heartland of lockdown. Yeah. And then The Way to Impossible Island, July this year. So similarly, I feel like I'm sort of Mrs. COVID author. My books are their total escapism, really, and set partly in Stone Age. They are linked, but they're not, one isn't a sequel of the other. And although there's some overlapping characters, they could be read in either order. So I can't get them the right way around. You can tell I don't know my left from my right. So The Wild Way Home tells the story of Charlie, who is this person here, who's a kid from now, who then encounters a boy from the Stone Age and ends up travelling back in time to the Stone Age and having a really big wild adventure, meeting all sorts of incredible Stone Age creatures, wolves and bears and other things that I'm not going to tell you about because I don't want to spoil it. And that's their story. But in The Wild Way Home, there are two newborn babies who are really important for the plot, but who don't do very much, as newborn babies don't. And so they wouldn't make a very good story focus at this point in time. And this one comes 12 years later, and it tells the story of these two babies, but they're all big. They're 12 now, and it's their own adventure. And this time, Dara, who is our kid from now, he's got a few problems of his own, as does Moth Girl, who is the girl from the Stone Age, but she ends up in the present day, so it's her adventures here. So there's a kind of parallel to them, but they're kind of different and stand alone in their own way. But I'm terribly proud of them, and I've really enjoyed every minute of writing them. So there we go. That's me. That's my books.
That certainly comes across when reading them. In fact, both of your books, Emma's and yours, Sophie. That love for what you're writing and that adventure comes across beautifully in both books.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on something that Sophie said about escapism and about, so obviously with kids' books, you get that opportunity to escape into something or escape from something. But I think as a writer, I use it as an escapism for myself as well. So when I'm writing, I'm also escaping everything that's going on. I don't know if you guys feel the same as well. But all my escapist fantasies go into my books, all the adventures that I want to go on as well, and all the kind of fun that I want to have goes into my characters, and I love that.
Yeah, no, definitely. We've got a couple of people have joined us and put in comments. Will Hamilton Davies, who actually is one of the authors who will be doing his event tomorrow morning, has put, sometimes we trick ourselves into thinking adventures are for young people, but they're not. They're for everyone. So,
yes, I couldn't agree more.
We've also got Helen, who's joined us as well, who's actually another author who I know. And if anybody who wasn't there at the beginning when we started, if you've got any questions for Emma and Sophie, please do pop them into the comments, or just let us know you're watching as well. So moving on from that introduction, what was your route to publication? Like, what was that journey from, I know, Emma, you've just said you sort of started, been writing for about 5 years, but how did you go from writing to actually being published?
Okay, so I'm really sort of poster child for competitions. I love entering writing competitions. I was completely obsessed with them. And I think almost as soon as I'd finished my first draft, when my story is very similar to Sophie's, trying to write terribly, terribly serious books. But as soon as I realised that my style and my voice and my passion was in children's books, almost as soon as I'd finished this first draft, I was hunting for competitions to send my work out to. And, horribly embarrassed now, really, of the dreadful first attempts that I sort of put out into the world. These poor people that had to read it. It's terribly, terribly cringeworthy. But competitions for me, they gave me a purpose, they gave me a deadline to stick to, and they gave me something to kind of hope for. And it wasn't just sort of full length competitions. I was entering pitching competitions on Twitter, which back in those days, the old days of Twitter, was 140 characters, and sort of entering just like first page competitions. And that's how I eventually, through a competition called Peer Pitch, got a little bit of traction. I came second, which was really, really exciting. I got some feedback from the amazing Stuart White, who is a Right Mentor guru. And he just gave me the confidence to keep going. And I think, so that's really, really important for me anyway, was to have other people who knew a little bit about writing. So not just your friends and family, because they're always going to tell you, it's really, really good, we really, really love it. You just need to find that person or those people who are going to give you honest feedback, but be kind, and really encourage you to keep going. So with that competition, then came the next competition, and I was shortlisted for the Bath Novel Award. And in doing that, I was kind of already, that had given me the confidence to query. So I got an agent, and at the Bath Novel Award, I met Rachel Lachon from Chicken House, and they called me up and asked for a meeting sort of a few days later.
Amazing.
So that was where my opportunities came from, just entering all these competitions and learning about rejection, learning about how to get knocked back, and just to keep going and keep believing, and having other people also saying it's good, keep going.
Yeah, brilliant. And how about you? So what was
it's interesting actually, because it's such an odd parallel process, the making your writing out there from the creating your writing in here. It's just such a really different place to be with it. And it's so interesting actually, Emma, even though I knew you, I hadn't realized that route of yours. And I think having that braveness to just say to someone, even a faceless stranger on Twitter, or a world of faceless strangers, is, oh, I've written a thing. Yeah. Even for me, even saying to my friends, my colleagues, the people in my real world that I was writing stories, I felt like such a fraud, you know, and such an ageist. It's just like, who do I think I am to write stories? For goodness sake, you know, grow up, woman, get a real job, you know. But, you know, it just felt like such a ridiculous thing for me personally to almost come out as an author and say this, or not even as an author, as a writer, and just say, this is what I'm doing. So, yeah, I certainly didn't dare to enter any competitions or anything like that for quite a long time. But I did want that sense of community that you talk about, and that sense of being part of something, not just me in my head writing stories, and wanting to know honest feedback, whether this stuff was good or not. Because when you're in it, as I know you all know, you can't really tell, like, if this idea is terrible or if this idea is great. You know, you might be really enjoying being in the Stone Age forest and running away, and but actually, is it just like awful to read? I just don't know. So anyway, I enrolled on the MA at Bath University in writing for young people, which was just the best thing that I ever did. Not even just as a writer, as a human being. I've made some amazing lifelong friends, loved every minute. I did it in a year, so I stopped working as a teacher. I basically stopped everything else and just did that for a year so intensely, and absolutely plunged into this very brand new identity almost as a writer. And I kind of owned it, because I had to tell all the people in my life what I was doing with my time. And I had to say, yes, I'm doing an MA, writing for children. Oh, do you write? Well, yes, I do. I've done all my life, and I have to tell people. But it is really, the course was just brilliant. And it did, like Emma was saying, it's feedback, and it's actually being read, you know, and that's the real magic. Because, I mean, we're all readers as well as writers, I'm sure. And I know that, like, there's just a magic in reading as a creative activity too. You're taking someone's story into your own self, and you're putting your own understandings of your world on this story. And the fact that other people were doing that with mine just absolutely blew my mind. And so through the MA and writing with a real live audience of people who had to read my work every week, because it was kind of our homework, and if we didn't do it, they had to read it. And that just gave me the confidence through then, that feedback, to A, make it better, and B, to actually show it to even more people who I didn't have trapped in a room with me, who were forced to read it. People like agents and then eventually publishers. So at the end of the MA, an anthology is produced, and that has little samples of everyone's work in, and that anthology is then public property for agents and publishers and big cheeses basically to read. And I was really lucky to find my agent Nancy Miles through my piece for the MA, and then I worked with her for about a year on that before it then got accepted by Bloomsbury for publication. So it's almost that thing that Emma was saying, you just need this one yes, you just need one person who you trust and think, ooh, to say, yeah, this is good. And then you just can kind of feel like you can do it and it's okay, and then on you go.
Yeah. Oh, it's brilliant. And very different, like I said, very different ways, you know, your roots there were different, but obviously the same outcome. And
I mean, there's so many ways to get published, aren't there? There's everybody's story is probably subtly but completely different.
Yeah. And you need that, you need to kind of let, you know, it's that thing, you need to have people reading your work and also get used to that feedback from people before your book goes out into the world, and then it's a free for all, isn't it? And it's
I think, I mean, that would be one of my top pieces of advice, really, is just get used to letting it go. And accepting feedback, accepting the no's as well, because we've both said, you know, you need the yeses. The yeses are so important to keep you going, but there will be no's, and there will be so many no's, and you know, you might be hearing those no's endlessly and think there's never going to be a yes, but there will be. You know, you just have to keep going and find those people around you, as Sophie has said, that the community. And it, you know, it doesn't matter who those people are, where they are on their journey, as long as you've got somebody just to talk to who understands and who will say to you, yes, come on, keep going.
You can do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in our first festival, way back in 2019, which really does seem a lifetime ago, when we had in-person events, Emma, you did a brilliant workshop with a load of enthusiastic kids in Max Minerva's bookshop in Bristol. It really does seem a very long time ago. And it was about fantastic ideas and where to find them. So really the question first to you, Emma, and then also to Sophie, is where do you get your ideas from?
Oh no, see, I'm going to have to confess now that I get nearly all of my ideas when I'm asleep.
Okay.
I just wake up. I have the craziest dreams and I wake up. Like I did this 2 or 3 nights ago. I woke up and I've had a dream. It's a fully formed YA novel that I've just dreamt in my head.
Amazing.
Quick, get a pen, write it all down. I have dreams and I have imaginings, and I do exist in my head quite a lot. It's probably a trait of writers that I'm in a little world of my own and things just pop into my head, and quite often it's it'll be like a feeling or an emotion that's to do with a setting. So I might be walking in the street and hear birdsong, and there's a particular rustle in the trees or a certain sound, and it sets off a feeling which then turns into a premise. Now, whether that's, while I'm asleep at night, I wake up very excited the next day, or whether it is just, I've grabbed my phone, I'm going to write that down. I don't know what it means yet, but there's something there. And I know a lot of people start off with character. They come up with a fantastic idea for a person, or somebody with a really strong personality who's going to carry a story. But for me, it's usually a premise or a setting, or sometimes a what if. But it's always kicked off by something really, just really subconscious.
That's really interesting. I'm quite different in mine, in that actually a place tends to be, for me, like what you're saying, but going for a walk. A place is something that for me sparks ideas quite a lot. And I know sometimes I'm writing about a place and I don't know where it is or where it's come from, and it almost makes itself in my head. And The Wild Way Home certainly was based on a real place near where I grew up in Northern Ireland. So this is my wee photo album from when I was a girl. And this is me and my sister. Ooh, where's my lens? When we were wee girls, and growing up at that point, I'm the big sister. That's my finger doesn't know where it's going. There's me. That's my sister. So when we were wee, we had quite a lot of freedom, and we had friends who lived in this amazing house with a gate at the bottom of the garden. You opened it and you were just in this forest. And that was where we loved to play. And when you have these family friends, you love going to their house because their house is so much more fun than yours, because anyone else's house is always more fun than your house when you're wee. And so we played in this woods a lot. And when I was writing just random little snippets and bits and bobs on my MA, I kept finding myself in this wood because I could really tangibly remember it. Those real memories that it's not just from a photo, you actually remember the feeling of a place. I really remember this place. And so I looked into it, and then I found, and this is also where my inspiration comes from, is like sort of things I find when Googling. So I looked into this forest just to check if it was real, because like I will say, these writers' brains can make all sorts of stuff up. But it was real. There's this place called Mount Sandal Forest, and it's in a wee town called Coleraine, near where I grew up in Northern Ireland. And why it's really cool is because it has the remains of a Mesolithic settlement there, and it's actually the oldest Stone Age remains in the whole of Ireland that have ever been found. And when you go there now, there's nothing to see. It's just, archaeologists had found stuff there. And as a kid, I didn't have any real awareness of that. But as a writer later, once it sort of clicked in my head that actually I had been in a place where Stone Age people were, I suddenly thought, oh my God, Stone Age families would have been there, and there would have been Stone Age kids, and I can imagine if I met one, and all these things all sort of fed into each other. So sort of a mixture then of like a place that is very real, and then a bit of research on other stuff that is actually very real. History helps me a lot, or objects or stories in the newspaper or things that are actually happening, taking the gem of just the crystal of that, and then growing other extraordinary or unusual or different things that haven't happened from it. That's where I think I get a lot of my ideas from. But I like to anchor them in something true, because I think it makes it feel more possible, like it could happen.
Exactly. Yeah. So what do you do? So how do you turn those sort of what ifs, those ideas, into something more substantial? Like I think, Emma, you sort of talked about, how do you know if an idea is a good one, and how do you then start writing? What's your process, or what's sort of the way that
I think that's a really that's quite a stumbling block for a lot of people, especially if you do have a lot of ideas, or I suppose even if if you don't have ideas sort of pinging in your head all the time. Both extremes are kind of tricky, because how do you, if you've got that one idea, how do you know if it is really the one? Or if you've got all of these crazy ideas pinging around, how are you gonna, like, well, I'm gonna go for that one, or am I gonna go for that one? I don't know how it's gonna turn out. And I think lots of people have lots of different ways of really exploring a story, trying to find out what's at the heart of the story, or maybe how that story might pan out all the way to the end. Because to take just a little nugget of an idea, and then sort of think, well, I've got to plot out this, if you're writing a middle grade book for sort of 50,000 words, how am I going to take this tiny little thought that is just based on a place or a feeling or a character? What on earth am I going to do with it? And for me, the process that usually works for me is to think about, right, well, who is the character, first of all? I think it's quite important to know, in whatever your premise or world or scenario that you've come up with, who's going to exist in that place. And you don't have to kind of work everything out about them, but have an idea of so who is going to take me to explore this world, and then give them a goal. So what's their want that's going to take them, again, all the way through this story? Okay, so now we know kind of who they are. What do they want? What's their obstacle? What's going to get in the way for them? And that is, in children's fiction anyway, 99% of the time, an antagonist, somebody really fun that has lots of potential to get in the way of your character going all the way to the end of this 50,000 words or whatever. And then importantly, what's at stake? So what do they risk? What's going to happen to them if they don't get to the end of this goal? And that gives me like a core thread to follow all the way through this story. So if I can write those things down and kind of turn it into a little mini pitch. So such and such a character wants this, but this is getting in the way, and this is the terrible event that's going to befall them or the world or their friends, their family, if they don't do it. If you've got all of those pieces of the puzzle, I think, then for me anyway, I know I've got a workable idea. And once you've got that little pitch, then you can start building on all of those elements. You don't have to be overwhelmed by, well, I've got to write this whole linear story. You can just work on the character, and then you can work on the obstacle, the villain, which I really like to do. I love a good villain. Yeah. I do. I get really gleeful about good baddies. And then the stakes as well. That's a really, really important thing. And I think a lot of the times that's what's missing. If you've got an idea, you might have a character and you might know what they want, and you can easily put somebody or something in the way of that. But what's at stake for them? That gives you, I think, the heart of the story. And that stake can be it can be a big thing, it can be an end of the world kind of stake, or it can be something really, really personal to them, something really relatable to your readers as well. So it doesn't have to be a big bombastic kind of thing that's at risk for them. It can be personal. It can be, ideally, it can be both.
Yeah. How about you, Sophie?
Oh, I'm inspired, Emma, because I love the way you think, and I love the clarity of that. I really wanted to sit and write it all down.
We all should be making notes.
This is totally what I should do. Oh my gosh, this is it really felt, you make it feel doable. And I'm like, please, can you just come and write my book? Because I need all those things. They really made me laugh, actually, because when Wild Way Home, when I got to my first publisher meeting with my publisher, and it had been decided they were going to take it and it was all fine, and she sort of sat down and said, so what does your character want? And I suddenly realised I'd written a manuscript, had been accepted by an agent, had been accepted by a publisher. What she said, I was like, I don't know. The thing that you really should know, and the things that you're talking about that you absolutely should know to build an idea into a story, I kind of tend to forget about, and it is the worst thing. And I don't want to tell you how I write my stories because it's really bad and it's a real pain in the neck way to do it. And don't listen to what I do, listen to what Emma does, because it's so much better. Because what I do is really stupid.
But basically follow Emma's advice.
Please follow Emma's advice. Okay, this is not good cop, bad cop, but do this or don't do this. Okay, so this is what I do. I get really far and then suddenly think, I don't know what my character wants. What's at stake? I don't know. Who's the baddie? I don't know. And honestly,
I can help you with that.
Oh my gosh, all the really important things that you're supposed to know, I really don't know. But what I do, and this is so inefficient and so stupid, and just don't do this thing. Basically, I write books like I'm in a labyrinth and I've been put there and I've just got to keep going until I find the way out. And I don't do nice, sensible things like write a plan of the way around this labyrinth. I just go along it and I describe every single footstep in stupid detail, because even though I'm going to end up cutting these entire sections, I still have to do it. Writing. I write myself down the street and I'm along it. And then I realise it's actually a total dead end. That entire thread of my story is not worth pursuing. So I have to strip it back. And then I'm starting again from whatever point in the labyrinth I took that wrong turn. And then I go down this way. And then I'm like, yes, I know where I'm going. And I've got direction. I know what my character wants. And it's all great. And then suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I'll be like, what's that? Oh, it's a tooth. Oh, brilliant. I'm going to go that way. And then I get myself all distracted with something that wasn't supposed to be in the story at all. And then go down there. And sometimes that's a dead end. So basically, I just write stupid, copious amounts of story that will never be used in any shape or form, some of which I really like. And then I'm really sad to have to get rid of. But somewhere amongst all that, I do find good stuff. And the thing with the tooth, that did just appear. I was writing something different and suddenly the character just found a tooth. And I was like, yes, this is a tooth. This is brilliant. I don't know where that came from. It wasn't in the plan. And actually, even though it wasn't supposed to be there, it carried my story, even though it was a very small thing. And it's almost, I guess, being able to trust. And I don't think I can do this very well. So I'm sort of saying something that is, I'm not necessarily good at, but I feel I should be good at. Trust your own instinct to know when this is a workable idea, when this is a valid pathway, and when it's worth pursuing, and when actually it's not going to be a dead end and it's going to lead somewhere. And I think I'm still working on that. I'm still trying to build that instinct and trying to build that ability to trust myself and also to know when to stop. And I think it's all well and good, except it's incredibly inefficient and very frustrating when you're watching a little word can't go up and up and up, and then you realize that actually you've totally messed up and you just have to delete loads. That's my method. It's bad. Don't listen to me.
But this is where there's no real right. You've just kind of proved that there's no right or wrong to anything, because even if you feel it's inefficient, and yes, you might write much more than you need to, but if you find those little nuggets of something and that forms part of the story, then it's not wasted at all, is it?
Yeah, I think that's a really exciting way to write.
It's exciting and stupid. But what I do, when I'm feeling frustrated that I've wasted time, what I do tell myself is I know that character really well, because even if they haven't, their adventure down the canal on the boat doesn't feature in the real story, they've still had an adventure on a canal, you know, and that's formed part of them in my head and made them feel more real, I guess, and rounded. So that's what I tell myself anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you need your character to feel real to your reader, so they've got to be real to you. So you do need to go on those adventures with them in order to know them. And if it doesn't end up being in the story, well, it kind of still does, because it informs how you're bringing your character to life, doesn't it? Even, you know, those words aren't in there, but the feeling is still there, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Nothing wasted. There you go. So sort of moving on from that, both Sophie, The Wild Way Home and The Way to Impossible Island are at their heart brilliantly exciting adventure stories, and reminded me of the adventure stories that I loved reading when I was as a kid, as I'm sure we all did. So how do you, well, we kind of had a glimmer of how you create with your labyrinth idea, but how do you actually go about creating those adventure story settings? Or how can somebody who wants to write adventure stories for this age group, how, you know, what ways can they get that idea and write those adventurous story settings?
For me, it's very much about kind of what I was saying earlier, all the sort of heavy, thinky-thonky, grown-up stuff that I know that I had in me, because it like infected all my writing when I was younger. I tried to get that out of the way, because actually kids don't, this is going to be a horrible generalization, kids don't really care about thoughts and feelings. They do, but in a kind of spoonful of sugar that helps medicine go down way. You know, the thoughts and feelings, I feel, have to be demonstrated through action and through stuff happening. And someone somewhere who was very brilliant said to me that every single chapter, maybe even every single page, has to move, has to go somewhere, has to have an importance, has to take that character somewhere. So it could be they're physically going from A to B. It could be that it's an emotional journey that they're going on. So at the beginning of a chapter, they are in some way changed by the end of that chapter. And so that's something that I really hold very, very close when I'm writing adventures. And I just try to get my like boring radar really, really firmly on, because I know myself well enough to know I've got a tendency to be a bit navel-gazing. So navel gaze, so, stop navel-gazing, bring on a bear or a something. And I've got a whole cast of exciting things in my head waiting to happen. And when those things are there, I love writing. I think that's the other thing. Sometimes writing, I'm like, I'm bored of myself. This is so terrible. But then I suddenly need to give myself a bit of a kick up the bum and just say, come on, like, just bring in some mad, brilliant, silly thing and let something amazing happen within a chapter. So that's what I try to do, is just constantly be not letting myself just drift, and to have something happen all the time that just keeps you sort of waiting. But then also, I say all the time, to have a chance to let your character stop and maybe swallow everything that has happened. Because if it is a particularly eventful, adventure-heavy story, it's sometimes really important for your character to, my characters quite often find themselves by a fire, like a fireside, or stop, you know, characters need to eat or rest, just like a human being would. And they maybe sometimes need just to have a little sit back and look at some stars and think, whoa, I just nearly got eaten by a bear. That was big. Oh, now I'm going to think about some other thinky-thonky thing that really, because I'm navel-gazing, I want to be in my books, but I want to sort of disguise it by sandwiching it up with lots of exciting stuff.
Yeah, no, brilliant. We've got Fox Benwell is also
Hi, Fox.
Same Sophie. Frustrating as it can be and as hard as it is to feel lost, sometimes that labyrinth spelunking for books means we find threads we maybe wouldn't otherwise. So yeah, exactly. So Emma, I read Milton the Mighty to my then 5-year-old. We read it once, and then we read it another 4 times in a row because he just asked me. So I read He was only 5, and it was like a time when he was into picture books, and picture books you read constantly, don't you? You sort of over and over and again. So we did this with Milton the Mighty. And the thing that we both loved about it were the characters. You know, in particular, the 3 spider heroes of Milton, Ralph, and Aubrey. And of course, you've also got your human characters with Zoe, her dad, and the fantastic Felicity Throbwell. So how do you go about creating those kind of memorable characters, including your favourite ones, villains?
Oh, yes. I love characters. I strongly feel that characters are what makes a book memorable. How they experience the fantastic adventures, settings, all the drama. It's all about how they relate to it, and then how in turn that means the reader can relate through them to what's going on. So everything hangs off having fun characters that you can really imagine either being, or you want to be them, or you want to be with them, even if they're a spider, the size of a blueberry. You think you really want to root for little Milton, even though you might go into the book wanting to squash him. And so I just try to give my characters as much personality and background as possible, and do exactly what Sophie's talking about, really, is write stuff about them, or spend a lot of time thinking about them, brainstorming, drawing even, to get to know them in a way that maybe 50% of the work that goes into that character development never makes it onto the page. And to me, that doesn't matter, because it means I know them. And if I know them, I can bring them to you, the reader, and then you can get to know them. And it's little things like, well, you might want to just make a character have a little quirk or something, and that's great. So maybe, let me think, one of the characters I'm writing in the story at the moment has a tendency, when he's stressed or thinking, rubs the back of his neck. Now, I just put that in there as I need him to do something that's, I was sick of dialogue tags. So I was like, I need an action beat. What's he going to do? He's going to rub the back of his neck. And that's great. But why is he doing that? Now, I'm not going to tell the reader why he's doing that, but it's important for me to know, to kind of think about what his background is. Why is he doing that? So I might spend some time just sort of contemplating something like that, or giving them a catchphrase, something that they always say, or a way of speaking. And don't just give them that thing. Think about why. What is it in their history, or their background, or their upbringing that makes them say this kind of quirky thing? Maybe it's something that their gran used to say, and it it's always been in their family, or it's something that reminds them of something that they've picked up from somewhere, that's something that's important to them. And again, it won't ever make it into the story, but to me it makes them a real living, breathing person / spider. And I think another thing, so my advice for people writing characters and wanting to develop their characters, is to think about what led them to the place that they are now. So what is their history, their where did they go to school, where do they live, what are their parents like, do they have parents, all those kind of things that make us who we are. Create that for your character, and that means your villain as well. I don't know who said this lovely little quote about the villain is the main character of their own story. So to them, to the villain, they're the good guy. They're just trying to do this same thing. They've got their goal and their obstacle and their stakes, and they're just trying to get the thing that's important to them. No matter how nefarious that might be, they still have their own valid reasons. I mean, maybe they're not always so valid, but they have reasons. And to me, a good villain has motivation, and not just the moustache twiddling. What was that? The guy with the big curly moustache who was in Penelope Pitstop.
Oh, I'm rubbish with names.
and I can picture him.
You
but
know
I
who
don't
I
know
mean?
him.
Yeah, it's sort of that quintessential villain.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, villains need love too.
Yes. And how do you what do you do? Have you got sort of like a character chart? How do you actually do your delve? Was it just through the writing?
Yeah, it's usually just through the writing, just through thinking about them. I do have a big piece of paper on my wall where I kind of scribble notes and I just chuck things on there as well. But when I'm talking to people about character, and anybody who's watching and who's got a work in progress that they're working on at the moment could do this now, is think about what your character might have in their pocket. And quite often that tells you a lot about who they might be, or if they're a spider, maybe what have they got in their little web somewhere. So I quite often do little exercises like that, and just write it all down. I get notebooks and just jot all this stuff down. I mean, you can go online and you can find the most comprehensive character sheets. It's like making a character in Dungeons and Dragons. So you fill out all the little bits about every kind of personality trait and what they're wearing and what they like for breakfast and all the rest of it. And if that works for you, then that's great. Do that too. Or you could maybe just pick some questions that seem relevant rather than spending hours, because it is a massive procrastination tool. It's just
it avoids the writing
about your characters.
Yeah.
I do sometimes find pictures on Google Images or on Pinterest of people or celebrities that maybe make me think of my character or just put me kind of in a mood for the character voice or something like that. Anything that you can kind of latch onto a little bit. It's like, oh, he sounds a little bit like Chris Hemsworth. I don't know why that just popped into my head.
Next character in your book.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Lauren has just put Dick Dastardly.
Thank you.
So Sophie, is it just the same? Is it again through your reams of writing that your characters come out? You don't have any kind of structured plan or character chart?
Yeah, afraid so. And also their wee voices, they talk to me, but they do, they really do. And I really totally agree with what Emma was saying about the background of characters and also the fully fledgedness of your background characters. I think it's really easy to have a character of convenience just because you need someone to drive the bus, because the bus isn't going to drive itself. So you have to bring in a bus driver. But obviously, we don't need to know about the bus driver's mother and his deepest, dark things. But at the same time, I do always invest in, like, my books tend to have a very small cast, and each member of that cast I have to really invest in and know a lot about, even if I'm not necessarily mapping it in a chart. For them to be in the book, I need to be able to, that old-fashioned quiz, like Mr. and Mrs. thing, where you got to like answer all those questions about your other half. I need to be able to do that with my characters, even if only in my head, and even if they're quite minor and they're only in for a chapter, or they just pop in. I feel like investing in those other characters. Again, I think it's about the sort of reality of it, making it seem real of a story for me.
Yeah, bit of depth. Yeah, the depth to it as well. Sophie, you mentioned before, I think very briefly, about chapter endings.
Yeah.
And what's sort of the importance of that particularly within this sort of middle grade adventure stories, and keeping the reader hooked? How important are they?
I mean, for me, I write with lots of different readers in my head, child readers first and foremost, but also I'm writing as a mum and knowing that there are authors that I'm really cross with because they have really long chapters, and when my kids are saying, let's just read to the end of the chapter, and it's a school night and it's getting really late, and you're like, yes, okay, and then they're still there. It's like, author, you're bad. But for me, my chapters do tend to be quite short, partly because I want each one to kind of have a thing that's happening and then it moves on, and in the next one there's a different thing happening, and it helps me to break them up into small segments. But also because I know that somewhere, I really hope out there there'll be a dad or a mum saying, thank you, Sophie Kirtley, for your short chapters. But at the same time, I want my child reader to really annoy their parent by saying, oh, but it's a cliffhanger, please can I read on to the next bit? Da, 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 da. You know, I want to have that kind of parallel thing. So I very, very deliberately try to end my chapters before the event resolves, or before with a cliffhanger, basically. So there's something there that is going to make you want to read on to the next chapter. And then I try to start the next chapter with, in my mind, for the child, it's actually the next day. And the reader, I mean, so for the reader, it's actually the next day, and they need to very briefly have a way to sort of find themselves again within the story. So my chapter beginnings are probably a lot less interesting than my chapter ends, because my chapter beginning, it's not like a recap, but it's somewhere to like anchor you back in that cliffhanger moment that you did have to leave because your parent was so cruel they made you turn your light off. That sort of tragedy. And actually, I was thinking about that question before, and I was thinking there's some other children's authors that I've read. Woo, everything's going to fall over behind me. Recently, who do really, really brilliant chapter beginnings and chapter ends. I think Nisrana Farouk does amazing starts to books. So if you've read The Girl Who Stole an Elephant or The Boy Who Met a Whale, they both begin in total in at the deep end moments that I really love. And again, brilliant cliffhangery chapter ends. And as well, Nicola Penfold, who's really very descriptive and immersive writer, but she also has, they're not necessarily action-filled cliffhanger endings, but they're endings that leave you sort of hanging on a moment in a way that you really want to find. You're so invested in the sort of emotional journey of the character you really want to read on. Anyway, there are just a couple of ones I think are really good examples of that.
Yeah, that made me laugh because I read all 4 of your books to my son. So my son's younger than your sort of the age group that you write for, but I've been reading them to him. And it just suddenly remembered about the short chapter endings, but the fact that we ended up reading so many. And I'm always the one that, like, we really need to go to sleep now. But it's loved. But at the same time, being, loving reading and obviously being a writer myself, I love the fact that he wants to, let's read more. It's a wonderful thing, and you do it brilliantly. So we've got the whole novel written and your first draft and managed to get it down. Emma, alongside your writing, you also do M-dashed and do freelance novel editing. So firstly, how important is self-editing, and how do you go about it before, you've got your rough first draft before you actually send it, whether you're going to approach agents or publishers or even get, a trusted friend or fellow writer to read it for the first time?
Yeah, I think editing is really, really important. And also it's not as scary as it might sound. Everybody edits. So, I mean, I'm really bad at following the so-called rules. So ideally, when you finished your first draft, you'd want to put it away, walk away from it. This is the classic advice. Put it in a drawer for somewhere for a couple of weeks. Do something else, write something else even, just allow your brain to disconnect from the story, because when you're immersed in it, like Sophie was saying, you can't see what's wrong with it. You can't see, you just think it's all brilliant. You think it makes sense. And in your mind it does, because you fill in all those gaps that are missing. But if you can't do that, if you're so excited about your book and you want to just dive straight in, so you get to the end, you write the end, and then you go back to the beginning. It's like, I can't wait, I want to dive in and carry on. I think that's absolutely valid too, because it probably is your brain telling you that you're still really super excited about this project and you're passionate about it, and somewhere in the deep crevasses of your mind, your brain knows what to do. So maybe by leaving it, you might kind of lose that impetus. So if you're the sort of person who wants to dive straight back in right at the end of it, then do it. Or if you're like me, and you edit every chapter as you go, which is really bad. I know. I can't stand all the wiggly lines or the spelling mistakes, but it also helps me move on to the next chapter if I just do a little recap of what I've just written. And if that means I'm changing some words around, then so be it. It doesn't matter. And editing doesn't have to be scary, and it doesn't have to be perfect. I think it's just really important to reread what you've done. But if you can, get someone else to read it, to do what we call a beta read, and just read it as a reader and give you some feedback and comments. And maybe you could channel their focus as they're reading it. You might want to ask them some questions like, who was your favourite character? What did you particularly like about them? Were there any points where it was boring? Were there any points that you thought were really, really good and really exciting? That sort of thing. So you can always ask somebody specific questions to help you with your editing. But yeah, in an ideal world, you'd put this manuscript aside and then come back to it and do what I kind of think of as a skydive. So I like to look at it from a distance and look at all the big stuff, the stuff that I was sort of talking about earlier in my structure. Now, I'm not a very good plotter. I write a little bit of an outline and then I go on a little wander as well. So I do need to do a lot of editing. So I go in and then I look at the structure first. So, does it have a beginning and a middle? Is there something happening in the middle? Because quite often you get that saggy bit in the middle where they're just pootling along, wandering between the big thing that happens to set it all off and the big climax that you've got, the thing that you really wanted to write that entire time, all the drama at the end. And then in between, they're just having coffee or something. So make sure something's happening in the middle. And have you got an ending? Is your ending satisfying? Does it feel good? Does it feel wrapped up? Are all the questions answered? So if you posed questions at the beginning, particularly questions like, what does your character want? When you get to the end, did they get them? Did they get what they wanted, or did they get what they needed? And are they changed? So has your character changed emotionally, fundamentally, in some way from the start to the end? So that's like big picture stuff. And then I just like to get sort of closer and closer and closer, then start looking at the chapters. And I'm very much on Team Sophie with having something happening in every chapter as well. So for each chapter, you could look at whether your character has a goal in that chapter and what gets in their way in that chapter and what the consequences are. And those consequences, do they sort of add to the plot? Is there causality from those consequences? And you don't have to have it in every single chapter, but ideally you want your characters to be doing something, exactly like Sophie said, doing something important that moves the plot forward, that moves the story forward, that makes the reader want to carry on reading and not go to bed on time.
Yes, exactly.
So if you've got chapters where there's not really a lot happening and you say, oh, yeah, but it's character building, or it's, look at this beautiful setting that I've made, or I really love how this language sounds. Look at my lovely words. It's probably, you either need to put something in there or just get rid of it. And then eventually you can dive in and do the line edits and make sure your spelling and punctuation's right, but my spelling and punctuation's terrible, so I don't really worry too much about that. So that's my kind of 3-tiered approach to
which is quite a nice idea, isn't it? It's the big picture and then going downwards chapter by chapter and then line by line, isn't it? But
honestly, if you want to do it the other way up, then do that. That's fine. There's no rules about editing. It's just you revisiting your story, trying to figure out again, what is it? Is this in the best order? Are the events in my story in the best order that they can be in? And is it fun? Is it exciting? Is the reader going to love it?
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
We're getting well, we're actually at 9 o'clock now. If anybody does want to ask a question, literally the next minute or two, pop it in and we'll ask it. I was just following on from Emma. I was just going to ask, do you actually, Sophie, do you actually like the edit? Because lots of writers, like you said, it doesn't need to be a scary thing, editing, but lots of authors loathe that editing process and prefer the writing. How about you, Sophie? Do you actually enjoy the editing bit, or is it fill you with fear?
I love it when it's going well.
Yeah.
And I hate it when I hate it. It's all a great big mucky mess. And I think it's because I'm not a very clear thinker and I don't have a lot of clarity in the way I think about anything. When I'm editing, what I find really hard is just holding it all. It feels so big and so messy. It's like, oh, at that very, very first stage when Emma was talking about her skydive and looking at it all, I just find that really vertiginous, that moment of just looking at it going, because it's not like fields, all this little like squares and everything. Mine is just like some sort of like lava mess, it's all whoa. So I think I find that really hideous. But the feeling of cracking it and actually getting, oh my gosh, it's working. I've ripped that whole dippy middle that Emma mentioned. That's gone. I've like made when you're actually getting there and you feel momentum with editing, I really love it. And I love criticism. I love having an extra pair of eyes, an extra set of thoughts on my work. And I love having someone say to me, just questioning. Always I've found the editorial process really, really helpful when someone else is looking at my work and they ask me a question. And I think if any of you are in the position of working with other people and critiquing their work, or having your work critiqued by others, whether it's informally or formally or whatever, I think just really listening to the questions that are asked of you and really trying to respond to those, for me, that's huge and really, really helpful. So I think thinking of questions that you can in turn ask people that you're critiquing that are going to move them forward, I think can just be so helpful. So that's something I really treasure, is the questions that people who I work with have asked me, because it opens avenues you haven't thought of. Because like Emma said, sometimes you think you've written something, it's so clear in your head, but then your editor says, so what does your character want? And you go, oh yes, that one.
And I suppose also that's the way of thinking about that constructive criticism, whether it's from a fellow writer or an editor, is the fact that it's to help you make it better, isn't it? It's to bring out, find those gems with it and just, polish it all off. So
and that's what the writing community is about, and the reading community, it's literally people wanting to help people, because we all really love stories and feel they're incredibly important. And I think that I know that we're all in the same boat there, and I think that's just huge and lovely as well.
Yeah, very supportive. Fran Price has put a lovely comment. I'm so glad I watched this rather than strictly some gems of advice. Thank you. There we go.
We dance as well, Fran. Emma?
Hang on, I'll just go and put my sparkly costume on. I'll be back in a minute. Better than strictly. That's your tagline for the next year.
We get a badge.
Better than
Storytale. Better than strictly.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
This has been so interesting and helpful. Such good and generous sharing. Thank you all so much.
Oh, thank you for joining us.
And Helen, thank you. It's been fascinating listening to you all. Well, thank you ever so much for everybody who has taken the time to listen tonight and take part. And thank you so much, Emma and Sophie, for being part of Storytale Festival again. Hopefully next year we will be able to do things in person and have face-to-face events, which will be lovely. But there's certainly a place for online, and particularly for a festival that is Bristol based, and we want to support local authors and things like that. It's lovely to be able to, reach out to people in different. I mean, I know Helen is in Italy, so we've got somebody from in Italy watching tonight. So it's lovely that it can, spread its wings and be seen everywhere. So also, I mentioned Literature Works before, but their support has been fabulous this year. We just got such a mini festival. We've only had 5 events for the whole of this weekend. So we just got 2 more tomorrow. They're both for children and families. 10 a.m. we've got Will Hamilton Davies with the Shrew with the Flu dance and draw along, which will certainly perk Ellie and I up at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And then at 11 a.m. we're rounding everything off with author and ecologist Alex Morse with a fabulously freaky animal session, which sounds great fun. And for anybody who's watching, please do follow us on Storytale Fest on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, and keep up with the news, and we'll see what we'll be doing next year. Rebecca's just put, this has been fascinating. Thank you. Oh, we've got another. And Chantel says, my daughter and I really enjoyed listening and understanding all of your different approaches to writing. So thank you. All right. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Emma and Sophie. And we will see you next year. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.